From the standpoint of a schizophrenic, I believe I have charted a strategy to the voice's expression. Something that is key to coping, or dealing with this imposed cognition. For years, I had sought to control what my senses were capable of apprehending. I wanted to stretch, and bend the parameters in which they met the world. I did not do this with mind-alterating drugs, but with concentration. I could get lost in my ears. I could numb every part of my body, including my reasoning capabilities, and yet remain wide awake at the level of the ears. Sound was my only experience at such times. I could do this with my eyes or physical feelings as well. I could send emotion in waves up and down my body at will. It was a very controlled experience, and I had done this for many years before the onset of the voices. I believe my only difference with the average person was that I knew perception could be manipulated, while other people did not bother. It was not until the inclusion of the voices, or the personalities, that my cognition of the world became an experience beyond my control. Much of the data received on my senses that is alternative to normal perception, is experienced as a forced antagonistic situation. I find it strange that at one time I was able to guide my senses, to perceive alternative perceptions, but after the inclusion of the voices, I have lost the ability to guide my senses. Not completely. That ability is still there, but just as my regular mind gets overshadowed by the voices, so does my senses in general when I attempt anything. Like seeing alternatives to normal perception. What is strange is that this ability is combated just the same as my normal mind, making the motivation of the voices a separate experience to just perceiving differently. What I find odd is that a development occurred that now has me waylaid. The onset of the voices. Before their arrival, orderly, even the alternative perceptions of the world were orderly. Orderly perceptions were an experience learned and trained, and honed in on, just as mental skills are normally trained and honed in on. That guiding the senses to perceive differently was much like learning how to operate a complex machine. I believe as infants we trained the senses to perceive in the terms that they do, and that I had gone further in developing them, simply because I learned one day that it was possible. Whereas the parents of infants don't encourage further expansion on tuning the senses. No more than for the infant to perceive in the terms they do. I felt we could do more, and that was my motivation to further expand on the senses' capabilities. Now of course, I may be wrong in assuming that I was just like the average man who had decided to do something different. But my experience with alternative perception was not an imposed and forced cognitive experience until three voice personalities showed up, or appeared on my senses. Up until then, perceiving, no matter what it was a controlled and self-willed experience. The onset of the voices was an inclusion of sensory data that contested my otherwise smooth flow of perceptual data. That it sought to be a reality against the odds, that it wasn't. That it deliberately targeted all my mind knew of it as being unreal, and sought to replace it with agreed-upon illusions, or a respected version of reality that really wasn't a true version. They presented a storyline for their existence. A reason why they were voices. I call this a storyline projection into my senses. Or they would borrow from the world's reasons for voices, like a religious experience. If I sought to disregard those reasons as false, they had developed others in reserve as to why they exist. It is really fighting to be a real experience. I want to ask those watching this video, and if they are schizophrenic, do your voices have several reasons for being a voice in your mind or experience? Are there more than one description for their existence? This experience of the voices deliberately accounts for all the points in the mind that understands the reason for their unreality, and seek to offer alternatives, reasons they do exist. They have done this to all the points in my mind that would routinely recognize and react to a world in which voices don't exist. They actually set the stage. I never would have known any of this unless I deliberately, and with no fear, sought to understand this experience, and refused to believe in their reality. Only then did the false reality pour on its strategy in desperate, dying fashion. I spent many months, and all the hours I was awake, dismantling what my mind experienced that offered the voices as a reality. They fought it tooth and nail, for today, I now live with some kind of freedom. Even though I can't stop the experience, I have reduced it to background noise. This is a funny way to speak about it, for the forced cognition is in my face, right to the bone, in my perceptual experience, but I no longer choose to participate, and not wanting to waste their performance, their projections on my senses, they have actually backed off. Only because I chose not to think about, even when thoughts were simulated, not to react to them, even when reactions were simulated, and not to respond to, speak with, or recognize their existence as a reality. Instead, what my senses is presented with is an illusion, therefore, no participation, on my part, is necessary. And this seemed to force them to adjust with their presentation. What is threatened by knowing its falsehood, is the voice's ability to have responses from us. Our participation. Why do the voices present a horrid personality? Strategy. In order for something that is an illusion, to remain in our minds as a full cognitive experience, it must strive to be in our thoughts and reflection after the initial hallucination. The more we reflect upon the illusion, and the more we do so as an adverse situation, the more successful is the distortion of reality. To this end, the voices will employ an attitude of an antagonistic nature, seeking to push as many buttons as it can, in order to leave as much an impact as possible, thus successfully imprinting a more effective presence in our mind. Think about it. If the distortion, the personality of the voices, were kind and sincere, we would have an occasional reflection about them, but would, like we do with the regular nice people in the world, take them for granted and disregard them. Only those personalities that are difficult and antagonistic give our minds the most tumultuous response. In other words, it is a performance. A performance that seeks to get as much reaction from us as possible. We have a natural ability to screen and filter out of our minds data that turns out to be false. Like when an object in the room, for a moment, looks like a person. There is an initial recognition of a person, but it is quickly discarded without another thought, when we realize it wasn't a person after all. Now if that illusion of a person spits in your face, insults you and demands recognition for it, we will be apt to consider what has happened. The experience is often a routine, and so, we learn to brace ourselves for the voice's onslaughts. We will begin to anticipate their further projecting into our senses, anticipating an indomitable experience, unlike one that did not move us. Thus being antagonistic, they have successfully forged a deep response in us. Their reality has more validity than a mere illusion, a mere temporary something that wasn't. How about a deeply religious person, who experiences the perception of a saint or demon? Both have moved them inside at deeply personal levels. But an illusion of a regular person, just as the regular people in the real world, make us unavoidably take them for granted. They are not noteworthy. Before the voices turned mean, they were very funny people. I literally laugh all day long at their antics, a memorable experience. But surely the tops, when it comes to making the biggest impression on our self-reflection, is a personality that is mean, petty, constantly engaging, ruthless, and downright low. These kinds of personalities, aimed at our most cherished feelings, will create the biggest response yet to us. The only weapon against such an onslaught of perceptual stimuli, an unreal and mean personality projection, is an attitude of detachment. Of realizing the best of people and the worst of people are, in the end, the same. Just stimuli on our senses. If we can learn to treat the world this way, then we can declaw the personalities of the voices. We may not have a mute button for the voices, but we certainly have a button that can keep us detached from the voices' results. Since we can't stop them, who cares about their onslaught? It is only data on our senses.